Before I start, I think I should mention that this story is a long one. And to be honest, from what I remember, what happened wasn't particularly significant. If you still want to hear it, go ahead. Listen. This all happened when I was third year at university. It was getting close to the holiday season, and me and 4 of my friends were planning to go to the beach. The problem was, being students, we had no money. So one of my friends suggested getting a summer job at the beach. That way we could go wherever we wanted to, without concern for the expenses. 2 of my friends were against it though. They said if they were going to go on holiday, they wanted to have fun, not work. So we decided to try and find a job working at an inn nearby the beach. This way, if the other 2 stayed at the inn, we could all stay together. Searching on the net, we found a surprising number of places that were recruiting staff. It seemed like others had the same idea as us, as many inns advertised they were willing to accept friends working together. In the end, it wasn't difficult to arrange the work, since all of us had work experience in customer service related work. We asked the inn if our other 2 friends could stay, and the keeper replied, "That's fine boys, but only as long as you pull your weight." Once we had decided the general plan, excited, we went to the gym to get fit and discussed our strategy for picking up girls. A couple of weeks passed and finally the day of departure came. I had worked in the local supermarket before, but never in an inn, and never out of town for that matter, so I was pretty nervous but excited all the same. The inn was quite small, only 2 stories high. It really just looked like a normal house belonging to a word-off old couple. As we knocked on the door, we heard the patter of feet and the door flung open to reveal a girl. I think she must have been around 17 or 18. Apparently the inn had 4 guest rooms, 1 dining room for all to share and 2 rooms for the workers to stay. As soon as we were inside, we were quickly shuffled into the living room. The girl who opened the door darted off and soon returned with some coffee and an older woman, presumably the innkeeper. The girl's name was Mia. Apparently she'd grown up in the local area, and the innkeeper was called Olivia. Olivia had blonde hair and was fairly big built. She had a hearty laugh and was really nice. I think I would have fallen for her if she had been a bit younger. He wasn't in at the time, but Olivia was married, so there were 6 of us running the place all together. After we finished introducing ourselves, we were directed to our rooms by Olivia. "The guest rooms are at both sides of the right corridor," she said. "Your rooms are at the end of the left corridor. Feel free to relax in your rooms for the moment. I'll give you more details on your jobs later." One of my friends looked at her confused. He asked, "Aren't there guest rooms on the 2nd floor too? What's the 2nd floor there for?" Come to think of it, it did seem a little strange. My friend's name was Dan. He'd always been the sharpest of our group now that I think about it. We'd known each other since the first year at uni. We'd been friends actually since the first day, since we took the same economics course. My other friend was called Steve. I hadn't known him for as long, but we got along quite well. I actually got to know him through Dan. Olivia looked at Dan and replied with a smile, "No, there's no guest rooms on the 2nd floor. We're not using any of the rooms up there at the moment." We figured it must be because it wasn't exactly the holiday season yet, so without giving it a second thought, we went to our rooms. I dropped off my stuff and opened the curtains of my room. The room I was in had a really nice view. As I stared out the open window and looked at the sea, I felt really glad that we had come. I felt like my troubles were drifting away on the warm, salty air. Honestly, I had been quite stressed recently. It was only 1 year from graduation, and I still had no idea on what to do when I graduated. I don't really know why, but I felt really relaxed. Even if it meant I had to work over the whole summer, if it meant I could get away from the reality. It was worth it. Well, obviously, I was looking forward to chatting up birds on the beach too, of course. And so that's how our summer holiday began. I was working pretty hard, but everybody was really nice, so I wasn't bothered at all. You know what they say, in the end, it's not what you do that matters, it's who you do it with. It had been around a week since we started working. Dan tapped me on the shoulder and grinned. This place is great. The location, pay and staff are perfect. If I weren't working here, I'd pay double to stay. Aren't you glad that I found it? As far as I remember, it was me who found the inn, but I kept my mouth shut. Yeah, we've already saved up quite a fair amount. Steve walked in on us talking. But you know guys, I overheard Olivia talking, and now that we're in June, it's gonna get much busier apparently. Oh shit, their prob's gonna open up the second floor too, aren't they? What are you on about? They said there were 4 guest rooms and they're all downstairs. Oh yeah, well then I suppose Olivia lives upstairs. I was under the impression that the rooms upstairs were getting repaired or something. Why are you so certain that Olivia lives upstairs? I said. Steve looked down at his feet. It seemed that hadn't occurred to him. Well, I'm not sure obviously, but doesn't she take her food upstairs quite a lot of the time? Poof. I don't know, it's not like I have a thing for old women like you. I don't really pay attention to what she does. Fuck off you prick, Steve replied, and looked at the floor again. I laughed. Apparently, Steve was in charge of cleaning the front entrance every afternoon, and that sometimes he noticed Olivia thumping up the stairs with food. I replied, but I didn't really give 2 shits. After all, what was the mystery? She obviously stayed up there sometimes, or she just liked to eat up there. Who the goddamn cares? But then one day, while I was cleaning the hallway, I saw something strange myself. Unknown to her that I was watching, Olivia had sneaked out of one of the guest rooms as quiet as a mouse. What was strange was that the innkeeper never did any of the grubby cleaning work. That was up to us and Mia. I didn't want to look like an idiot, so I kept quiet about it. But as much as I reasoned in my head for why Olivia was in the guest room, I could not come up with a logical explanation. So that night, I decided to discuss it with the others. To my surprise, Dan said he'd seen Olivia do the same thing. What the hell? I exclaimed. Why didn't you mention it? Well, I haven't seen it happen, you know, said Steve. And shut the fuck up then, I said. Dan replied, after a brief moment of silence. Well, I just assumed that she had some business to do that we weren't aware of. And you know, there's no way in hell Olivia would do it, but if I mentioned it, it'd be like we were accusing her of robbing the guests or something. So I figured that if you guys knew, you'd find it difficult to get along with her. I was a bit annoyed that Dan hadn't mentioned anything, but guessed he was right. I wasn't the best liar, and I wasn't the most social of the bunch either. But now that we all knew, we had to decide what to do. We didn't want to go on like this for the rest of the summer. For one thing, it would be hard to get along with Olivia, and if she really was doing something sinister, it seemed like something we should report to the police. So after some discussion, Steve suggested one of us should stalk Olivia to see what she was up to. You silly sod. Stalk her in this tiny inn, she'll discover us in no time. Well, yeah, lol. Steve laughed. So what was the point of saying it then? He didn't bother replying to that. Thinking about it didn't really make a difference, so we decided to put it out of our heads. After all, Olivia was really nice, and give it a week or 2, and our friends would arrive at the inn too. It was stupid to make a fuss over pure speculation, but being the adventurous types, we made a pact that day. We promised to report to each other anything strange that happened at the inn from henceforth. And so the next day, I found myself getting a text from Steve. Meet me in our room at 6. Don't be late. It it read. I was a bit pissed off. Why don't you just come to me, I thought. It's not likely going to be anything important anyway. All the same, I went to our room that afternoon on time, but with the intention of slugging him if it were a joke. So basically, Steve whispered, you know I said Olivia kept on disappearing upstairs with food? From what you guys told me yesterday, I got suspicious and decided to watch her until she came back downstairs. She came down really quietly, and I think it must have been only around 5 minutes. And? I said. Well, there isn't much point going all the way upstairs to eat if we're going to come back down in 5 minutes, is there? What it must mean is that there's someone living up there besides us and the guests. Dan sighed. Well, it's probably just a sick relation or something. Steve looked excited. Well, yeah, I thought that too. But she came back down with the empty dishes and cutlery she brought up with her. So what kind of ill person eats their dinner in 5 minutes? Now that really did puzzle me. This was starting to creep me out a bit. I wonder what could be upstairs. That's all that was on my mind for the rest of that day. So the next day, me and Dan finished our work early to meet up with Steve at the front entrance, and we waited for the innkeeper to appear with a tray of food. As Steve had described, it wasn't long until she slipped out the darkness of the hallway with a tray in her hands. She seemed to glide silently to the door, which opened up into the staircase. She opened up the door to the stairs without a sound, and quickly disappeared into the gloom upstairs, leaving the door open. And again, just as Steve has told us, she came down with a tray full of empty dishes after 5 minutes, and disappeared back the way she came. I let out a sigh of relief. Thank God she hadn't spotted us. That was pretty fast, right? Yeah, it is, I replied. Too fast. I wonder what could be upstairs. Well, I don't know. Shall we take a look? I'll be honest, Dan whispered. This is freaking me out. It was starting to get dark, and we didn't dare switch the light on in case of being found out by Olivia. But I made up my mind. Let's go. Isn't the door locked? Someone said hopefully. But as I turned the knob, the door creaked slowly open outward. The door opened a few centimetres, just so that Steve, who was standing to the right of me, could see inside. Suddenly Steve contorted his face and held his hands over his nose. Ah! What the hell is this smell? What? I sniffed the air, but I couldn't smell anything. But Steve was half retching at this point. Are you fucking with us, Steve? Dan was frightened, so was being rather prickly. Steve's actions seemed to really piss him off. But Steve didn't seem like he was acting. Seriously guys, you can't smell that. Open the door a little more and you'll smell it. I cautiously opened the door further until it was right open, but still no smell. Some warm, moist air flooded out instantaneously, but that was around it. Are you talking about the smell of this air? But at that point, Steve was no longer clutching at his nose. Wait, the smell's gone. You damn fuck, exclaimed Dan. If something happens up there, I've just decided I'm going to leave you behind as a sacrifice. Look, I'm sorry mate, but it really did smell. It smelled like rotting garbage. Leave it be, I sighed. It was probably just his mind playing tricks on him or something. The hallway at the top of the stairs was really narrow. It looked like only one of us could go in at one time. There didn't seem to be a light anywhere either. There was still some light coming from outside, so we could still see, but only just barely. At the end of the hallway was another door. I think from here only one of us can proceed, I said. Yeah right, none of us are going any further than this. What, we've got to? We've come so far. Well, why don't you go then? But I'm not going any further. Maybe it's not such a good idea. What the fuck, so you're not going to go in the end too? I exclaimed. It's fine, I'll just go. Dan and Steve replied in unison. Seriously? It's 100% nothing, but if I don't go check it out, I'm not going to be able to sleep. Saying that, I gradually shuffled towards the door. Don't get me wrong, I was scared. In fact, I was terrified. But at the same time, I was very excited. I just had to check what was beyond that door. I was halfway down the hall when I heard a cracking sound. I spun around to look at the others. They replied with a thumbs up. I looked down at my feet but couldn't see anything. The floorboards must be old, I told myself, but it was too dark to tell. I nodded to them and continued to shuffle along cautiously. The sound the floor was making got louder as I moved further towards the door. It actually felt like I was treading on something. Bugs? As soon as the thought occurred, I felt a shiver go up my spine. But I didn't feel anything wriggling underneath, and besides, it was too dark to see. It must be just my imagination. I was only a few feet away from the door when suddenly I smelt something. I clutched at my nose in pain. Oh, Jesus Christ. This must be what Steve had been talking about. Just as he had said, it smelt like rotting garbage or rotting flesh. Not that I know what that smelled like. That's when I saw it. There was a mound at the corner of the hall. Although it was dark, I realised it was a mound of rotting food. Tons and tons of food just piled on top of each other. I hadn't noticed it before because of the darkness, but I now saw there were flies everywhere this side of the hallway. Oh, frickin' hell no. Disgusted and terrified, I was about to run back when I noticed something that made my stomach literally turn. The door at the end of the hall had been bolted shut with a few planks of wood. A countless number of bolts jutted in and out the planks in all directions. One thing was obvious. Whatever was in that room, they did not want to let out. Did they have a bear locked in that room or something? It was at that point I realised that what I was doing was probably a bad idea. I turned around to head back as fast as possible, when a noise sounded from behind me. Someone or something was scratching at the other side of the door. Then, was that wind? Or breathing? I thought my heart was about to stop at that point, it was beating so fast. Who's there? Who's there? What's there? What's there? I felt like I'd stumbled into a horror movie through the cinema screen. Logically, the optimal thing to do at this point would be to run as fast as possible without looking back. I remember thinking when watching horror movies, why didn't they just bloody leg it? But in reality, running isn't as easy as you think it is. I neither had the courage to look behind me or start running. I just stood there, as stone as a statue. The only thing moving was my pupils and my eye sockets. My back was now covered in sweat. All the while, I got desperate. Move, you stupid legs! I willed myself to move. As I stood there, suddenly the scratching and breathing stopped. There was an instant of complete and utter silence. Then it started again, but this time not from behind me, but from the ceiling. In a single instant, somehow, the thing behind the door had moved itself onto the ceiling or into the attic. My legs started to quiver. Someone please help. That was when I saw something move in the corner of my eye. Oh shit, this really must be the end for me. But then I realised it was Dan. He had shuffled halfway down the hall and was waving his hand at me to get my attention. For some reason, I hadn't heard it before, but now I could make out their voices. "Oi, you alright, mate? Hurry back down here!" I felt the blood rush back into my legs, and I ran back down the hallway, pushing Dan and Steve out of my way. In a few moments, we were tumbling down the stairs. I don't remember any of this, but apparently I pushed them out of the way and continued running until I was back in the safety of our bedroom and under my bed. Soon after I returned, Steve and Dan knocked at the door. "Dude, what happened? Are you alright? Did you see something there?" I just shivered and didn't reply. I could still hear that scratching sound in my ear. I didn't want to think about it. There was silence for a second. Then Dan opened his mouth. "Answer me truthfully. What were you eating up there?" What was I eating? Maybe I hadn't heard him properly. "Dude, what were you eating?" Dan started to shake me roughly. "We were watching you from the end of the hall using our phones as a torch. As soon as you reached the end of the hall, you crouched down and we heard you munching. We weren't sure what you were doing. We were worried. So I went down part way and I saw you desperately eating something out of a pile next to the door. Your body was in the way and it was dark so I couldn't make it out. Dude, what the hell were you eating down there?" I got out of my bed. "I wasn't... What are you on about?" Then Steve pointed. "Dude, your shirt." I looked down at myself. My shirt was covered in rotten filth. Bits of mouldy fish and meat, crumbs of mouldy green bread, and brown smouldering rice covered my clothes. As soon as I noticed the filth, the smell of rotting garbage came back. Screaming and retching, I ran to the toilet and began to throw up. Through my spluttering snot and tears, I felt myself going insane. I didn't understand what was happening. I had a clear memory of what had happened upstairs. I still clearly remember the heavy breathing and the scratching. I didn't remember eating anything, and I hadn't crouched down once. I'd been too petrified to move. I just remember standing there like a muppet. To suggest that I would willingly eat the mould of rotten food was completely mad. But as I looked down at my hand, I saw they were also covered in gunk. My mind started to waver. What was I doing? Why am I even here? What's my name? Steve and Dan opened the bathroom door. They generally looked as petrified as me. Both were looking very pale. "Dude, seriously, tell us what happened. You're not acting like yourself." I looked up, and then threw up again. I told them one thing at a time on what I had seen upstairs. They didn't say a word, and just listened until I had finished talking. I know what they had seen and what I had seen didn't match, but they still trusted me and listened to my every word. I was really grateful for that. As I started to calm down a bit, I noticed that my legs and knees were covered in tiny scratch marks. Thinking it strange, I felt my knees and found there were little pieces of sharp something stuck on my legs. Maybe it felt like plastic. There were red pieces and white pieces, which had been slightly blackened. As I stared at the tiny objects in my hands, Steve let out a gasp. "Christ. What's up? Look at that stuff carefully. Aren't those nails?" All three of us froze. I felt sick again. It made sense. That crackling sound as I walked along the hallway wasn't due to old floorboards. It must have been due to trampling on these nails. Maybe the nails belonged to that thing which was scratching on the other side of the door. I must have scratched myself on them when I was kneeling down to eat the rotting food. It didn't matter anymore. I knew we couldn't stay at this place any longer. Guys, we've got to leave here. I know, said Dan. We should leave tomorrow after telling Olivia. Don't you think we should leave right now? Well, after all, we are employed at the moment, you know. Steve looked down at his feet. But she's really suspicious. She probably knows about the monster upstairs. I don't know what would happen if she knew we'd been upstairs. You idiot, we won't tell her about going upstairs. If we leave now, she might get suspicious and try and chase us or something. If we leave tomorrow, we can at least give an excuse in person. I guess you're right. Then Steve looked at me. I'm really sorry about what happened. You must have had a much more horrifying time than the one I had. I didn't really understand what Steve meant by that. Maybe he was freaked out by me. I didn't care though. So that night, we packed up our things and went to sleep. Or at least tried to sleep. I remember just shivering in bed and occasionally jumping up to puke in the toilet. I just tried to think about the rest of the holiday and the beach. If I even thought about the events of the night before, I felt like I was going to throw up again. But, although you'd think I'd be the one in the worst shape after last night, the guy who was really in trouble was Steve. Every time someone made a sound, he'd suddenly jolt like he was terrified of us. We didn't speak a word until the alarm went off the next day. I got out of bed to find Steve sitting upright. This time, he didn't even react to me and Dan moving. There was obviously something wrong with him. His face wasn't even pale anymore, but was tinted green. Dan patted him on the shoulder. Are you alright? You look like you haven't slept at all. Shut up! He snapped. He leered at Dan. Am I alright? Am I alright? Of course I'm not fucking alright. You don't get it. I came close to death last night. I thought I was actually going to die. I didn't know what he was talking about. Close to death? Was he that scared about my story? In our group, Dan and Steve tended to get along really well. I never seen him actually get properly angry. So when he shouted, it must have taken Dan by surprise. He looked properly confused and frightened. I knew it was insensitive, but I had to ask Steve what was puzzling me. What do you mean you were scared to the death? I was the one upstairs. You were just watching from behind. Steve now turned around to stare at me. Yeah, I was. And I'm still watching. He's still watching? Watching what? I didn't comprehend what he was saying. Had he gone mad from fright? Maybe he'd been possessed by something. That would be ridiculous, but I looked like he'd literally lost weight overnight. He looked thinner and whiter every hour. Quivering, Steve continued to talk. I was standing behind you and Dan yesterday, but even though I was near the far end, I was still watching. You mean watching me? No. Well, yeah, at first. It was when you crouched down, when I saw it. I didn't ask. Honestly, I didn't want to hear what Steve had seen. I just wanted to put the events of the night before behind me. But since they listened word for word to what I said, I felt like I had a duty. What did you see? Steve was silent. A shadow, I think. A shadow? Yeah, I thought it was your shadow at first. But even when you'd crouched down and started eating, the shadows were moving. Besides, it was so gloomy, I shouldn't have been able to see your shadow. They were so dark. Darker than black. As I stared, I realised there was more than one shadow. I think I saw 3 or 4 human-sized shadows floating around you. I felt goosebumps spring all over my back. I laughed. There's no way 5 people could fit down that narrow hallway. Steve must be off his rockers. I was the only one there, I cried, and you know it. I know. No other person was there with me. Yeah, maybe no people. What the hell do you mean? The shadows, they weren't on the floor. They were everywhere, stuck to the walls and the ceiling, like spiders' webs. They were moving like they were alive. They were... At that point, Steve started to shiver. It looked like he was having trouble breathing. Calm down. It's okay, stop talking. He continued to tremble, but went on. I don't think those shadows were human shadows. They were shaped like human shadows, but they weren't. So what you're saying is that there was something stuck to the walls that looked like human shadows? Steve nodded. My heart was beating so loudly that I thought it was going to explode. If there was something stuck on the walls and ceiling, it made no sense that they moved. Even if they were actually shadows, that meant something must have been there with me upstairs. So that means, without realising what I was doing, I must have started eating that rotten garbage whilst being surrounded by others. But then, what was the sound I heard? That sound that came beyond the door. Was I mistaken? Had it been coming from next to me? And that breathing? Felt my mind going numb. I could taste the filth in my mouth again. Steve seemed to calm down a bit, now that he'd finished talking. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to shout. No, it's okay, Dan replied. I'm sorry too. They were silent again after that. I just sat there. I thought the room was spinning. Then something occurred to me. What did you mean by that you were still watching? Oh, about that. I think I'm just a bit tired. I didn't know what I was saying. Steve laughed crookedly. Steve looked a bit better, but I saw his left eye was twitching uncontrollably. I didn't ask him any more questions. I don't care if you guys think I was a pussy. I was just too damn scared to ask. Just think about it. It was obvious that Steve was hiding something else. If I heard any more, my mind would have completely fallen apart. After a few minutes of stone silence, we heard the voice of Mia from the door saying that it was time for breakfast. None of us were hungry, but not wanting to act suspicious, I figured it would be better if we head down. The sooner the better, I said. Let's tell Olivia as soon as we finish eating that we're leaving. I'm not going, said Steve. By the way, Dan, you brought your laptop, didn't you? Can I borrow it? That's cool, but you should really come with us. She might be suspicious. Just tell her I'm ill or something. I have something I want to look up quickly, and there's not much time either. I'm sorry, but you guys go on without me. It'll be fine. We left him be. It was probably a good idea that he didn't move from his bed given his state anyway. In hindsight, we were being a bit dim. We should have just announced our departure without eating and just left. When we got to the dining room, the innkeeper was sitting with the breakfast, waiting for us. Did you sleep well? She said. I couldn't help reading behind everything she said. I sweated. Did she know what we'd been up to the night before? Yes, we slept fine. I'm sorry for being late. Dan told them that Steve was still in bed due to being sick. Oh no, replied Mia. It's probably best if we don't bother him today in that case. We just smiled. We couldn't exactly say, it's alright, we're going to quit today anyway. That'd be too insensitive. While we were eating, I thought Olivia was looking at me way too often. She just kept on smiling though. like watching me eating was the most fun thing in the world. It seemed like Mia had noticed this too, and she looked at Olivia every now and again with a really puzzled expression. We left the dining room as soon as possible. While walking back to our room, we heard Steve's voice from outside. He was talking to someone on his phone. Yes, today is great. Thank you so much, we heard him say as we opened the door. He must be planning to head out somewhere as soon as we returned home. It had no business with me, so I didn't bother asking who he had called. We dragged Steve up and went to find Olivia. The sooner we were out of this hellhole, the better. Olivia took the news without any emotion on her face. She just looked at us without even a twitch as we apologised. There was a brief moment of quiet. We just looked down at our feet, too afraid to look at her straight in the eyes. I couldn't stop thinking as we stood there in silence. Why did she keep dumping food upstairs? Were the shadows her doing? What had she locked up in that room? Then, Olivia smiled. It's okay, I understand, boys, she laughed. You guys have better things to be doing. She then went on to talk about our pay and how we should leave our dirty sheets in a basket, all the little details we needed to know and the things we needed to do before we left. We said our farewells and were about to leave when she called to us. Wait, here's a little present for you to take back home with you. With that, she gave us a brown envelope and a little white pouch, one for each of us. The envelope was rather heavy, but the pouches were really light. She didn't tell us what was inside, but I figured one of them was money. Behind Olivia, we saw Mia's face pop up. Enjoy the rest of the vacation period. Despite the horrible time we had yesterday, I couldn't help feeling slightly sentimental. After all, it was true that we had enjoyed most of our stay here. Our taxi was waiting at the front door, so we said our goodbyes again and set off down the narrow road back home. In the taxi, I finally felt safe. It had been a terrible ordeal, but once I was back home at uni, it would all be alright again. I'd rest a couple of days, and then I'd be back to enjoying the summer holidays with my friends. This time we had some money saved up, so we wouldn't have to work either. I felt my eyelids began to close. Overall, I guess this wasn't too bad experience. At least, it gave me something to talk about. Then, the car jogged to a halt. I opened my eyes to see Dan open-mouthed. Someone had parked a van on the road so the taxi couldn't get past. Standing next to the van was a massive tanned man with long dark hair wearing a dirty white shirt. It was Olivia's husband. He called to us. You didn't think you could actually leave here, did you? I gulped. I could still taste the filth in my mouth.